Hello everyone. Today you'll hear a recap of the movie White Boy Rick, a film based on true events. It's 1984. A father and son are bargaining with a gun dealer, trying to get a better price on several AK-47 rifles. Richard Wershe Jr. cleverly tricks the seller by threatening him with the loss of his license, since he was about to sell an assault rifle to a 14-year-old kid. The Wershe family lives in Detroit. The city has fallen on hard times, but Richard has no intention of leaving. He dreams of opening a chain of video rental stores and making a fortune. One day, Richard spots the car of a local black drug dealer parked outside his house. The newly purchased AK-47 comes in handy as he uses it to threaten the man who's dating his daughter. Dawn is already high. Her father tells her to get ready because they're going out for ice cream, but she'd rather hang out with Tyrone. She runs after his car wearing nothing but her underwear. At that moment, her grandparents arrive and quickly become part of yet another family argument. Down in the basement, Richard builds homemade suppressors for the AK-47s he bought. The next morning, Dawn wakes up her brother and tells him she's leaving. She's moving in with Tyrone because, in her opinion, living under the same roof as their father is simply impossible. Most white families live in the Detroit suburbs, while the city center is populated mainly by poor African American communities. Richard Jr. stands out like a sore thumb. He walks into a gang-controlled neighborhood and offers to sell the criminals AK-47s along with custom suppressors. The suppressors drive the price of the weapons up considerably. Ruddle is amazed by the kid's audacity. The boy just walks into their territory, risking his own neck without hesitation. Impressed, he invites Ricky to join them later that evening at the skating rink. Ricky is the only white guy among the black gang members. He can't help staring at the girlfriend of crime boss Johnny Curry, who also happens to be the niece of Detroit's mayor. Her bodyguards are local police officers working side jobs. In this city, everyone seems to be connected. The next morning, FBI agents show up at the Wershe house. They accuse Richard of illegally manufacturing, possessing, and selling firearm suppressors. They want him to identify his customers, but Richard refuses to cooperate. Agent Snyder then pulls Ricky aside and shows him photographs of several gangsters. Ricky points only to men who have already been killed. Of course, he refuses to betray their leader, Johnny Curry. Later, Ricky hangs out with the gang, entertaining themselves by shooting rats with a pistol. One of them gets splattered with blood. The federal agents realize Ricky can be pressured. One evening, they ask him to get into their car. Inside is Detective Jackson from the Narcotics Division. The streets have been flooded with crack dealers. Ricky has already seen what the drug did to his own sister, but the warning doesn't change his mind. Then they show him a photo of a dead man. He had been shot twice in the head with a pistol that Ricky's father had previously purchased at a gun show. That means Richard Sr.'s fate is now in the hands of his teenage son. Ricky agrees to cooperate with the authorities. They take him to a drug house and have him make a controlled purchase. After completing the assignment, Ricky heads home carrying a huge duck he found in a dumpster. For his work, he's paid $300. Johnny Curry is about to marry the mayor's niece, so he buys wedding suits for the brothers, and one for Ricky as well, since he's one of their closest friends. The wedding reception is held at the mayor's mansion. Ricky seems to be the only white guy among all the guests, but later he notices a man talking to Johnny. It's Art Derrick, one of the biggest drug suppliers in the area. As Ricky wanders through the luxurious estate, he dreams of becoming rich someday. After the celebration, the younger crowd cruises around the city. Ricky spots Brenda and asks her out. She admits she thought he had been killed. Around here, when someone suddenly stops showing up at school, it usually means they're either dead or in prison. Ricky flirts with Brenda, and thanks to his proud little mustache, she can't resist him. The two end up hooking up right there in the parking lot. Detective Jackson soon gives Ricky another assignment, selling drugs on the street. Ricky hates the idea at first, but then he learns he can keep all the profits for himself, around $4,000. That's too tempting for a teenager to refuse. Before long, he becomes one of the regular dealers, and the shoebox where he keeps his cash is soon overflowing with money. The year is now 1985. Richard Sr. continues buying and reselling firearms. One day, he spots his son riding in a car with police officers. Suspicious, he searches Ricky's room and finds a box containing $10,000. Furious, Richard confronts his son. In his eyes, Ricky should never have made a deal with the authorities, no matter that he was only trying to protect his father. That night, Ricky grabs the duck and borrows his grandfather's car to drive to a diner. The bird is meant as a gift for his sister. Dawn looks even worse than before. Ricky begs her to come home and leave Tyrone, convinced that the relationship is destroying her. When Ricky returns outside, he realizes he left the keys in the car, and someone has stolen it. His relatives rush into the street and open fire with 2 guns, but the thief manages to escape while they are immediately arrested. Illegal firearm possession, driving without a license, and attempted murder, those are the charges Ricky is facing. Fortunately for him, the FBI agents promise to help him avoid serious consequences in court. Grandpa is furious because he's now lost his car. Later, Ricky visits Johnny's garage. The gangsters question him about what he told the police, unable to understand why he was released so quickly. Johnny is also unhappy that Ricky has started dealing drugs on his territory. He gives the teenager a strict warning: if Ricky is carrying even a single gram of drugs, he is never to come anywhere near Johnny or anyone close to him. Leon Lucas owes Johnny a huge amount of money, but he manages to negotiate more time to pay it back. As a gesture of goodwill, he invites the gang to a boxing match in Las Vegas. For Ricky, it's the first taste of what true luxury looks like. Ricky finds it hard not to stare at Kathy, Johnny's wife. He liked her from the very first moment he saw her. When it's finally time for the boxing match, Johnny discovers that no VIP seats were ever reserved for them, and every ticket has already been sold. As a result, the gangsters are forced to watch the fight on TV in a bar. Afterward, Johnny attends a party hosted by Art Derrick. There, another gangster starts mocking him for being turned away from the fight. Johnny refuses to put up with the humiliation. He grabs a champagne bottle and brutally beats the man with it, leaving him half dead. Johnny never forgives Leon Lucas for embarrassing him like that. To settle the score, he sends 2 gunmen to Leon's house. They spray the building with bullets while Leon's 2 young sons are inside. One of the boys does not survive. The attack is carried out with modified AK-47 rifles. Ricky later visits his father. Richard jokes about his son's appearance. The kid proudly wears a huge Star of David around his neck even though he isn't Jewish. His father urges him to go back to school, warning that if he keeps going down this road, he'll become so deeply involved that he'll never be able to escape. Meanwhile, a bribed police officer informs Johnny that the federal agents have an informant inside the organization and advises him to test the loyalty of his people. Johnny realizes that the murder of a child can't simply be covered up. Someone is bound to take the fall, and he'd rather it be some other black man than anyone from his own crew. The entire neighborhood is on edge. Ricky starts avoiding contact with the federal agents and temporarily moves in with his grandparents. Just to be safe, Richard decides to get rid of every AK-47 he still has. Ricky tells his father that he plans to return to school. He walks into the house to check on his dad's pet fish when one of Johnny Curry's associates shows up at the door. The man apologizes, pulls out a pistol, and shoots Ricky in the stomach. Ricky is rushed to the hospital under a false name, where doctors fight to save his life. Richard blames the federal agents for everything and vows to get revenge on Johnny. He waits outside Johnny's garage with a weapon, but when the gangster arrives surrounded by too many people, Richard loses his nerve and backs down. Agent Snyder visits Ricky in the hospital and asks who shot him. Ricky refuses to identify the attacker, but the authorities already know who ordered the hit. On top of that, they raid one of the drug houses, and the dealers there give up Johnny without hesitation. A SWAT team storms Johnny's home and arrests him along with the rest of his gang. After being discharged from the hospital, Ricky hopes to find his sister back at home, especially since Tyrone has already dumped her. But she's still nowhere to be found. He wonders how he's supposed to return to school while wearing a catheter, only to learn that the administration won't allow him back after the shooting. They consider him a danger to the other students. It's now 1986, and Ricky still hasn't fully recovered. Then a 10-year-old boy confronts him, claiming that Ricky got his sister pregnant and insisting that he should act like a man and take responsibility. Ricky visits Brenda to see his daughter, who is now a month and a half old. He gently picks up the baby, and at that very moment, Richard walks into the house. The grandfather is even happier to see the child than Ricky himself. He admits that he never planned to have either Dawn or Ricky, but in the end, everything turned out wonderfully. Unlike his father, Ricky isn't so optimistic. He suggests that Richard should stop selling guns and start dealing drugs instead. They could get rich in no time and completely change their lives for the better. But Richard has principles. He refuses to poison people by selling narcotics on the streets. Distracted by the conversation, Richard nearly crashes into another car. Ricky keeps trying to convince him, arguing that Dawn never came home because they've always lived in poverty. Now he's a father too, and he needs money to support his own family. Not long afterward, Ricky visits Art Derrick and arranges a new drug supply deal. After Johnny's imprisonment, he has inherited a large customer base. One night, Ricky and his father go to a drug den to bring Dawn back home. Richard carries his daughter out in his arms. She screams, kicks, and fights to break free, but eventually she becomes too weak to resist. Now she has to endure withdrawal. Richard locks her in a room to help her get clean. Meanwhile, Ricky's business is booming. He's making a fortune and starts showering Brenda with food, gifts, and everything she needs. At just 16 years old, Ricky has become the new kingpin in the neighborhood, while Kathy has been left without her husband. The two begin exchanging lingering glances. Richard does everything he can to save his daughter, and at last, Dawn's condition starts to improve. By 1987, Dawn has settled into a quiet life at home. Richard gathers the family to celebrate the opening of his very first video rental store. One day, Ricky finally works up the courage to flirt with Kathy at a bar. That same night, he ends up at her apartment and learns that Johnny has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. Now Ricky realizes that not only can he take over Johnny's business, but he can also win the affection of Johnny's wife. For the first time in years, Richard feels truly happy. Both of his children are living under the same roof again, and he believes they should appreciate what they have. He warns Ricky not to become greedy and not to take more than they actually need, because everything they've built could collapse in an instant. But it's already too late. The very next morning, a police task force storms the house and arrests both father and son. Detective Jackson calls Ricky a complete fool if he really believed he would never get caught. The newspapers quickly nickname him the Cocaine King. Officers discover 8 kilograms of cocaine hidden in a box in his room. Richard is outraged. He argues that it was the federal agents who pushed his son into selling drugs in the first place. But who would ever believe that a 15-year-old kid had been working for the FBI? The family later meets with FBI agents at a motel, but the agents refuse to admit that they pressured Ricky into dealing drugs on the streets. According to them, he made his own choices and got himself arrested. Ricky is now facing a possible life sentence. However, the authorities offer him a deal. He could earn his freedom if he helps plant an informant inside a powerful organization. The FBI wants to get close to the mayor, and they plan to do it through his niece, Kathy, with whom Ricky has grown extremely close. In the end, Richard persuades his son to accept the offer. Richard asks the agents to put their agreement in writing, but they refuse, insisting that he simply take them at their word. Ricky later meets with Kathy and asks her to arrange for people connected to the mayor to help escort a large shipment of drugs. The operation leads to the arrest of 11 police officers, along with several of the mayor's closest associates. The evening news openly credits Ricky Wershe for making the bust possible. Richard reassures the family, insisting that everything will be fine because the federal agents promised to take care of the situation. Eventually, Ricky's trial comes to an end. The jury returns its verdict. Richard Wershe Jr. is found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His grandfather is furious. The boy is only 17 years old, and in his eyes, the court has stolen his entire life. Ricky is transferred to his new home behind bars. He is allowed just 1 hour of exercise each day and must spend the rest of his time locked alone in his cell. Richard waits outside the federal building to confront Agent Snyder, but she avoids him. She tells him that nobody ever made any guarantees. The FBI requested a lighter sentence for Ricky, but the court refused, and that was the end of the matter. Desperate for answers, Richard tracks down another federal agent. The man explains that the investigation ultimately failed to bring down the mayor, so the authorities settled for a much smaller target, his son. Later, Dawn visits Ricky in prison and brings his young daughter with her. She tells him that their grandfather became seriously ill after the trial and may never recover. Holding back tears, Ricky begs his sister to show the little girl his photographs as often as possible so she won't forget what her father looks like. Richard then takes the phone and tries to comfort his son. He says he has spoken with the agents and believes Ricky might be released in 6 years or so. But Ricky has already lost hope. This isn't life, he says. It's a living death. Richard confesses that he always wanted his son to have a better future than he did, yet in the end, he was the one who stood in his way. He apologizes and asks Ricky to forgive him. He promises that the family will always stand by him, but Ricky quietly hangs up the phone. Ricky remained behind bars from 1988 until he was finally granted parole in 2017, after serving 29 years in prison. It became the longest prison sentence in Michigan history for a non-violent offense. His father passed away just 3 years before Ricky's release and never lived to see him walk free. Meanwhile, Johnny Curry and the members of his gang had long since regained their freedom, and the corrupt police officers managed to avoid punishment altogether. Throughout his years in prison, Ricky stayed in touch with his daughter. She eventually built a happy family of her own, married, and became the mother of 2 sons.